In the name of the compassionate Christ. Amen. Jesus knows all about our struggles. He will guide till the day is done. There's not a friend like the lowly Jesus. No, not one. No, not one. About 6 weeks ago in Minneapolis, where I've been living part-time, I was driving and singing that because I was nervous. And today I'm singing it again because I'm nervous. But so happy, so very happy to be with you. I was nervous driving a car in an unfamiliar city. And I was by myself, and I was driving for a medical appointment on the other side of town, which meant crossing the Mississippi River. And I hadn't been there before, so I used the GPS, or the sat-nav, I guess, and I had it going, and I'm driving along, and I suddenly realized I'm about to come to the intersection of Chicago Avenue and 38th Street, also known as George Floyd Memorial Square. I was coming to the traffic circle. It's not really a square. There's a circle there, and you come around, and what used to be Cut Food is now Unity Food, but the memorials to George Floyd, who died at the hands of police on that terrible day 4 years ago, the memorials are there as if it had just happened. There are fresh flowers, and there are murals. Did I stop? No, I did not. I would feel a little better if I had, but I was anxious to be on my way. I didn't want to be late for my important appointment. And besides, it was a traffic circle, also an occasion for me to be nervous behind the wheel. I didn't stop. And besides, passing through there made me feel anxious and sad and tired. No time to stop to pray, and besides, where would I put the car? Is it nothing to you, all you that pass by? Come and see whether there is any sorrow like unto my sorrow. So today, you and I are going to stop for this other tragic and terrible death in Jerusalem 2,000 years ago, the crucifixion of one Jesus of Nazareth on a hill called Golgotha. This time, yes, let's stop. We're going to deliberately take in as much time as we can, whether we're at home online or sitting here in Fifth Avenue. We're going to take some time to listen, to sit, and to pray in a way that's intensely personal, but which is meant to draw us into such a deep place of communion with our Lord Jesus Christ that when we're done, we will be so much better with all the rest. Break into the peace within, one Eastern poet says, and in the world outside, you will easily manage the 10,000 things. So understanding that the 10,000 things are still there, the world is still suffering, I won't do the list. We come to pray. And we're invited to pray in a particular way. It's a little bit like role play. I want you to come with me today and pray as if you were there at Golgotha on that very day, in that very hour. Find your place among the onlookers there. and listen to the last 7 things that Jesus said. Now, just a tiny tutorial. These words come from 4 different Gospels in the New Testament: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And they don't always match up. And if you, in a moment between talks, maybe you'll look and see that the citations say where they come from and which Gospel. And yes, it does make a difference, because there are different voices coming to us across the years, carrying what was initially hearsay, written after the Apostle Paul wrote 1 Corinthians. These things, we don't say so much that they were written as that they were written down, captured from the air, the stories that people had told over the years. And I like to think it's like my mother and her 3 sisters. When they got to talking about their parents and grandparents, they each had a different version of the story. Same people, same events, but a little detail here, a little shading there that helped me to see who those people were. So instead of Eva, Marie, Elsie, and Glendora, we have Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and their branches of the Christian family continuing the stories as they told them. And so, to this first word from Luke, sometimes called the great physician, who gives us the most human sounding Jesus. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Forgive them. Who? Who is he forgiving? Well, first thought, for me at least, is the soldiers who have just nailed him to that cross, and those who have beat and stripped and tormented him, the few who are gambling with his clothes nearby. Then there are the onlookers, the crowd that came. We tend to want to look away from that, but in the United States, as recently as the 1930s, crowds would gather to watch lynchings. To come to a public execution might have been a thing, and those people would have been jeering and taunting Jesus. Oh, but if you go a little deeper, it's not just those bad guys. If you remember the story of the Passion as it came through on Palm Sunday and into last night, the disciples, for the most part, have run away. Remember that? They're not there. With one exception we'll come back to later. They're not there. They've scattered, they've fled, they were likely afraid that they would be taken up in the net that was gathering up Jesus. So Peter, who lied last night to say that he didn't even know Jesus, is Jesus forgiving him? Or the Jewish authorities, or the Sanhedrin, or Pontius Pilate? That I think of him as the patron saint of white liberals. Is he forgiving Pontius Pilate? Oh, and then there's Judas. There's Judas, who betrayed him with a kiss while he was praying. Whoa. So this is a portrait, I would think, of human beings at their worst. Good people chickening out and doing bad things, bad people doing bad things. It's a terrible mess, and Jesus is forgiving them. You know, that's not all that popular. The very word forgiveness can just make some of us so angry, depending on what the situation is. It's fine for us to be forgiven, but what about those other people? But if we're going to do this work with integrity, we need to be at the cross as people who are ourselves in need of forgiveness, and just for a little while, forget the others. Can you? T.S. Eliot wrote, "Go, go, go, said the bird. Humankind cannot bear very much reality." The work of Good Friday is for us to see if we can bear a little more reality about our world, about our lives, about ourselves. So do this wherever you are. Be here, be there at the cross. Receive this forgiveness. It is for us. And we come to the second word, which comes right after the word you just heard from the Gospel of Luke. If you were to look in the leaflet or in reading in a Bible, you would see that there's no break. Jesus has just extended blanket forgiveness for those who do not know what they do. And yet there are others still taunting him. Among those who are taunting him are two other men being crucified on crosses to the right and to the left. And one of them has at Jesus, come down off that cross, save yourself and us. But the other takes Jesus' part and says, you know, you and I, we're getting what we came for. We're being punished justly, but this man has done nothing wrong. And with that, he turns to Jesus and says, remember me when you come into your kingdom. Remember me. What a request. Remember me. Oscar Wilde apparently said the only thing worse than having people talk about us is having no one talk about us. If we're forgotten, no one talks about us anymore. And some of us live in fear of that day when we will be forgotten. It comes in time, but we don't want it to happen in our lifetimes. As we grow older and anticipate perhaps an end of life in some sort of assisted living situation where we were once called Colonel, but now we're Joe, or we were Reverend and now we're Sue, and no one realizes who we were or what we did in our younger years, don't know that we ran a marathon or whatever it was of which we've been so very proud, the things we did to make our families proud or not. We'd like to be remembered. We don't just want to disappear in a fog of old age or isolation. How much worse it must be, though, for men and women who are incarcerated, hoping not to be forgotten over the course of a 20-year sentence. You know, I have to say one of the happiest Holy Weeks I ever had was when the parish choir in Christ Church Rye was invited to go to join the prisoners at Sing Sing for Maundy Thursday, the day that Jesus was arrested. The first time we went, we had no idea what we were doing. We got there, for example, and didn't anticipate a screening process that makes TSA at the airport look like a cakewalk, giving up watches, bangles, books, belts, lots of things to pass through one at a time. We were checked to see if our skirts were long enough and whether our shoulders were bare. Took a long time, and I frankly thought, but at the time we reached the chapel where our congregation was waiting for us, that they would be cranky. I mean, it would stand to reason. They're confined, they're have no control or agency over their time and their lives. How annoying to have this choir turn up so late. I couldn't have been more wrong. When we got to the auditorium cum chapel, we passed down the side aisles as they cheered and sang. They had a pickup band. They had a bass guitar, another guitar, a drum kit, a keyboard, and they were singing and cheering because we had come there, because we'd come there. Wow, the chaplain, Patero Sabuni, turned to me at one point and said, "Oh, this is heaven. This is heaven." We sang to them. I got to sing with the choir because it was the Stainer, God So Loved the World, easy enough for me. I got to sing with the choir. We sang to them. They sang to us. And Sabuni, Patero Sabuni, especially, he would lead the songs. And there was one that we learned that day: "I want Jesus to walk with me through my joy and through my sorrow. I want Jesus to walk with me." And then, "I am not forgotten. You are not forgotten. We are not forgotten. Jesus knows our name. I am not forgotten. Jesus knows my name. He knows my name." So what did Jesus say to the man who hung on the cross next to him? "You will be with me. You will be with me in paradise today." For this third word, we shift to the Gospel according to John. Quite different from the others. Jesus, according to John, is so often in full possession of himself, he hardly seems to suffer. He's so strong. And so it is that from the cross, he looks down upon his mother and John, called the beloved disciple, or Jesus' best friend. An awkward position to be in as one of 12, the best, the first, the most beloved. But note well, he's here at the cross, when at least according to the other accounts, the other disciples have run away. And he's here. And he's here with Jesus' mother. He's here with Jesus' mother. Now, Mary, the mother of Jesus, is actually among a group of Marys. There's Mary Magdalene. There's Mary who might have been the wife of Cleopas. There might have been as many as 4 Marys there. Very popular name. But we're sure that the main one was Mary, his mother. And she stood there and watched as this went on. So taking care for his mother, he says to her, "Woman." I know that sounds disrespectful, it's not. He may have meant all women, the new Eve. It's actually a gesture of respect, I think. "Woman, I see you. Here is your son, John." Now, here's where John and I part company, because I, as a mother of 3, one of whom is a son, I do not want a replacement. I do not want a replacement son. What mother who has lost a child under any circumstances, even before birth, wants to hear, "You'll have another"? You cannot replace a child. You cannot. Which is why when we come to Mary, we do begin to come to the genuine sadness of the hour, because she is watching her son die. And he is taking care of her. In my struggle to get my head around this, I read a commentary that suggested that legally Jesus could give his mother and John to one another, that relationship would be binding. So that John, as Mary approached her later years, would literally take care of her, which in the ancient Near East meant a lot. What if she were widowed? She would have no means of support if there was another son. The Gospels are hazy about how this was supposed to work. So Jesus is being sure that his mother is taken care of. And I'm quite certain that that is the point of the passage. However, they stayed. They stayed. Have you noticed how even through the darkest and most tragic of stories, there is this thread, this glint of gold of human compassion? They stayed, and they stayed, and they stayed. In the Garden of Gethsemane, Jesus had asked Peter, James, and John to wait 1 hour. This will go on to 3, and they're not going anywhere. They will be there. So here in this tale of betrayal and loss, we find a thread of faithfulness, of love, of constancy. Here is Mother Mary. Here is Brother John. And they are there for Jesus to the bitter end. As Shakespeare wrote, love bears it out even to the edge of doom. And Paul said, love bears all things. These lines from Rainer Maria Rilke come to mind from his Book of Hours. There's also this to see. Blessed are the ones who never turned away, and blessed are those who stood quietly in the rain. Theirs shall be the harvest, for them the fruits. They will outlast the pomp and power whose meanings and structures will crumble. When all else is exhausted and bled of purpose, they shall lift their hands that have survived. And now to the fourth word. A few weeks ago, our grandson, who was almost 3, but really still 2, he's big for his age and he's strong, and yes, he can be terrible. I don't know what it was that had upset him. He was there with his parents. He got his hands under the white metal play table and he flipped it. His parents were so stunned that it was still there in that position on the floor, top down, when his grandfather and I got there later that afternoon. I don't know if it was a proof of his strength or something about his personality and passion. He flipped the table. Just like Jesus. In the temple, we do know what made Jesus angry enough to flip tables when the money changers who were facilitating the temple ritual were there. We might say they got on his last nerve. And he flipped the tables, fashioned a whip out of cord, and drove the animals away, upending the whole enterprise. So Jesus was capable of anger and rage and despair. My God, why have you forsaken me? All right, it's the first line of a psalm, Psalm 22. He could have been just reciting scripture, but for my money, he used the words that came so well to mind. My God, why have you forsaken me? And it's not Abba, it's not that soft daddy-like title this time, it's Eloi. It's the ancient name. Why have you forsaken me? Why? Now, a lot of people wish he hadn't said this. Wish he had not said this. But they couldn't suppress it, could they? Well, there are two reasons. In your leaflet it says it came from Matthew, but it also comes from Mark, which is the oldest of the Gospels, and the one where we feel the most certainty that we're really hearing an eyewitness. Yeah, he really did say it. He really did say it. But was it an embarrassment to think that God, the Son of God, felt betrayed by God? I mean, it's a mind twister. Was he separated from himself? Had he abandoned himself? Had he lost his moorings? Was he out of his mind? Was the pain so excruciating that he couldn't be himself any longer? That creates a whole raft of theological problems about who we believe Jesus is over the centuries. But gee whiz. Notice that he doesn't say that God doesn't exist. This is an entirely different sort of complaint. He addresses God directly and says, why have you abandoned me? He didn't say, I've gotten lost, like a kid in the grocery store who gets separated from his mom. Where did you go, my partner in mission, my Father? Whose idea was this anyway? Am I not doing this for you? Didn't we have an agreement? Do you not love me anymore? Have I done something wrong? Was I mistaken about this work? Was I wrong? Was it worth it? Why have you forsaken me? How can Jesus, of all people, not understand that God is still there? Well, I think this is one of those times when we have to hold two impossible things in tension. He knew that God was still there, and he knew that God was not there. Not there. Like looking at the dark side of the moon. The moon is still there, but you cannot see it. You cannot see it. Jesus had to experience this if, as we believe, he was going to know what it was like to be human, then he had to know what it was like not to be able to see God. That is the defining mark of our mortality. Since our expulsion from the Garden of Eden, we cannot see God anymore. And Jesus could not be fully human if he didn't have at least a moment of that terrible blindness and the despair that can come with it. So, is this common to the life of faith? Did Jesus want us to know? Was it all right for him, for us to hear that he thought God had just cut him off? I think it's terribly important for us. It's terribly important because we're apt to confuse faith with certainty. And we think sometimes we can't see God or we can't feel God. We don't feel God in the same, perhaps emotional, uplifting way that we did at a certain time in our lives. Certain part of our journey, God seemed ever present and so accessible and full of consolation, and then we think we must have done something wrong, right? Here's the evidence that you don't have to do anything wrong to feel this way. It doesn't have to be the result of your sin. In fact, it doesn't make sense for God to do that, actually, to cut us off on account of our sin. This is not tough love, saying, okay, Jesus, you blew it, so you're on your own now. It didn't happen that way. One of my favorite and most consoling among the saints is Brother Lawrence, who wrote The Practice of the Presence of God. He lived in the 17th century in France. He was a monk. After he had been a soldier and a prisoner of war, he was a monk. And he told someone who came often to visit him, a certain Joseph of Beaufort, that for 4 years he thought he was going to hell. He believed he was damned. He believed he was going to be utterly rejected. It didn't matter what he did, how hard he prayed, how faithfully he kept the office. It didn't matter what he did. It wasn't going to work. But out of love, he stayed. Out of love for 4 years. He thought it wasn't working. And he thought it was his fault. He thought it was his fault. But that ended. And he was able to leave with us from his dying days some of the most beautiful counsel for prayer that exists in the Christian tradition. Mother Teresa, with those private diaries that she hoped would never be published. No wonder she didn't want them published. She felt that God had abandoned her, that she no longer had the intimate contact with Jesus Christ that had been the purpose of her whole life. It went into darkness for her, and it's dangerous stuff. It's dangerous stuff if we would be tempted to believe that Mother Teresa didn't know what she was doing or that God had abandoned her. No wonder she didn't want it in the hands of the public. But she went there. You know, Madeleine L'Engle, the great writer and friend in the Episcopal Church, used to say that she thought the big risk Jesus took was not getting crucified, but becoming a human in the first place. That the incarnation was the big deal. The incarnation is the big deal. Why? Because of this. Because of this psychic suffering, when he felt he could not see God at all. Jesus went there, as we say. He went there. He felt the darkness, the lack of hope, even abandonment. From our point of view, receiving this is not just courage, this is love. For us, he experienced it all. Does this not make him our truest friend? And we come to the fifth word. I thirst. December 28, 1905, in the Englewood neighborhood of Chicago, a young Salvation Army officer by the name of Arthur Follett went down to the storefront mission to try and set up a Christmas party for the children of the neighborhood, which was a very poor one. He had a special surprise, a magic lantern. It was a stereopticon, a very primitive film projector, fueled by an acetylene tank. And he was going to show them pictures from the Bible. But he had gone down to set up the machine and to get things ready for the party, when at about 6:30, the acetylene tank exploded and threw him through the plate glass window along with his wife and his 16-year-old daughter. Arthur Follett was my great-grandfather. And that daughter was to be my grandmother. Now, 2 different newspapers recorded the incident. I'm grateful to my second cousin, Ellen, for tracking them down. But what the family said about the accident was a little different and more detailed than what the newspaper said. It must have come down from his widow or my grandmother that as he was being carried off by ambulance to the hospital, he refused painkillers. He didn't want anything for the pain. Now here's where the legend part comes in, because he said he wanted to pay for his sins. He wanted to experience the pain for his sins. I raise this because there's ambiguity and fuzziness in the different accounts of the crucifixion about whether or not Jesus accepted the vinegar that was offered him to drink. First off, we're not talking vinegar like you put in your coleslaw. Vinegar is a clunky translation. It was sour wine, is what the Roman soldiers had on hand to work with, either to drink themselves or to work with people in the course of crucifixion for 2 reasons. One, they mixed it with gall or myrrh, and again, the Gospels are a little fuzzy about which it might have been. It would be more of a pain reliever. Now, we don't really, would the Roman soldiers have shown mercy in that way to try to dull the pain? But also, that mixture made it harder for the victims to breathe. Crucifixion works by asphyxiation. The exhaustion of hanging on the cross makes it harder and harder to breathe. And the subtle intoxication of the sour wine would have made it harder still, which would have meant that the Roman soldiers could have called it a day a little bit earlier because they wanted these fellows to die so they could go home. Was it an act of mercy or not? The Gospels are mixed up a little about this. In Matthew and Mark, he's offered it, and in one instance, he's refused it. In another, it sounds as if he accepted it. And in John, he simply says, I thirst. I thirst. Protestant theologians over the years have loved the idea that he refused it, especially those in the temperance movement, yeah? What better grounds for abstinence and refusing to drink than to say that even Jesus on the cross wouldn't accept a drink of wine? I don't know about that. But also there's the question of the incarnation again. Did he want to experience it all? Did he want to experience all the pain of human existence? I mean, besides the lack of oxygen, nothing but thirst does us more damage. Dehydration kills people. The lack of clean water kills people. We have to drink. We have to drink. So he knew thirst. Now, this word is from John. It is from John. And it's couched in a much more deliberate sequence. Jesus knowing that his time was near, that the end was near. Then he said, I thirst. It's almost as if he has to do this or to say this for things to be concluded, for his work to be done. He has to acknowledge the thirst. And you could do some beautiful symbolic devotion and thinking of, oh, what is this man who offered living water to the Samaritan woman at the well? How is it that he himself is thirsty? Or is this a reference to the blood and water which will flow from his side But I want to dial it back more to the human side here and think for a minute about what else thirsty means. I'm a big fan of Elizabeth George, the murder mystery author, and I've just about come to the end of what I can read of hers, but there's a key character, Isabel Ardrey, a police officer with a terrible drinking problem. And in one of the later mystery novels, this drinking progresses to the point that it is literally ruining her life. She keeps saying she's thirsty. And the first few times I saw it in the book, I thought, she's thirsty, she's dehydrated, she needs a drink of water. But in the book, she would get a glass of water or she would get some orange juice. And then she'd throw up the orange juice and have some vodka because the thirst was for something else. How funny that in the English language we talk about spirits, that the thirst also represents our longing for God. Living water, we want our thirst to be quenched. Jesus knew what it was to yearn, to desire, to need. For those struggling with substance issues, this passage is so important to understand. Jesus is there with us and understands. Sometimes a person will pick up a bottle or a drug to assuage a thirst that isn't physical at all. It is spiritual. Jesus said, I thirst. Oh, but we could pan out, couldn't we? Back to the need for actual water. Living water, clean water in Haiti, in Gaza, in Michigan, in Mexico City. People all over the world are suffering for the lack of clean, abundant water, and they are thirsty for justice. Let justice roll down like waters and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream. Come, Lord Jesus, and bring to us that living water at last, that our every thirst might be quenched. And the sixth word from the cross, Jesus said, it is finished. This comes from the Gospel of John. In two other Gospels, it's not his final word. He doesn't say it. He says something else. But in John's Gospel, he says, it is finished. So here's one possible last word from him. On the East Yorkshire tombstone of the author Winifred Holtby, these words are carved. Lord, give me work till my life shall end, and life till my work is done. Give me life till my work is done. When Jesus says it's finished, does he mean we're all done here, or there's nothing more I can do? Is this time's up, pencils down, click send? Is it the last possible moment? Yes. Is it defeat? No. But the finality of it, if we were in Ireland, this is where the keening would begin, yes? Because by his saying it's finished, it means he's going. So many of you have been at the bedside of a loved one as they were dying and found a moment when somebody had to say, it's okay. You can go. When you realize that the suffering of your beloved has just become too much, unbearable to watch, unbearable for them to endure, and you wonder if they're hanging on for you, and you need to say, it's okay. Let go. But they may well be wondering, is it finished? For you and for me, I don't know. Did you write the will? Are your affairs in order? Is there someone to whom you owe an apology that you didn't make? Were there words of love and thanks you meant to send? Were there revisions in the text of your life that you're leaving behind? We fear the end. Yes, we fear the pain for sure, the suffering and all of that, but this last breath, this impossibility of going back and fixing anything ever again, it's terrifying. It's terrifying. And for Jesus, surely it was a relief for him to say it's finished. After all, this is John, where Jesus' life is his work, and his work is his life, and if the work is done, he is too, and that's it. There's no more reason for him to stay in this earthly body if the work is done, if he's passing it on to us. It's finished. There's nothing left to be done. But for us, and for those who were with him that day, the revolution had not come. The Romans still in charge and as brutal as ever. Hunger still a problem. Children still dying before their first birthdays, wars breaking out, terrible things going on. Is the work done? Is it finished? Or is there some great change about to occur? Is he giving in, or is he signing off and entrusting some of this into our hands? Whichever it is, this is the moment of separation. They do not believe at this moment that they will ever hear his voice in human tones again. And certainly none of them is remembering at the moment that he's promised to come back from the dead. I don't think I would remember either, would you? He's declaring that it's over. I like to think that he had done everything he wanted to do, the way that you and I would hope for someone we love in our lifetimes, that they've been able to do, to say, to feel, to experience everything they wanted in life. We certainly want that for ourselves, and if we're blessed enough to have work, serious work that we believe only we can do, yes, I hope we have life enough and time. But we have no guarantee, do we? What would it mean for you, for me? I hate to get heavy-handed here, but what if this afternoon one of us had to say, it's finished? It's the end. It can come quickly. We would like to know that we could pass through and away from this world with no unfinished business. How are we doing with that? Listen, use this as an excuse. If you do owe somebody an apology, hey, 3:30 today is your perfect opportunity to say thanks, to express love, to give kindness, to forgive that one last person who's still you've been unable to release. Why not? Why not? To have the grace to finish the work, the life we've been given. Wouldn't that be wonderful? There was a priest in the Episcopal Church by the name of James Simpson who died in 2002. Most of his work was in Washington, but he also helped out at St. Michael's up on the Upper West Side. And Jim Simpson puzzled me. He was earlier formed in his priesthood than I was, shall we say. I was really quite young at the time. But he had this uncanny habit. Whenever he had a weekday Eucharist, celebration of Holy Communion, he would end, not with the blessing, he would do that, but then he would kneel in the center aisle of the chapel where we were and say the prayer for evening. Go figure. 8:30 in the morning, 12 noon, didn't matter, prayer for evening. He may have learned it in another parish. I came to associate it with funerals. Perhaps you know it. Oh Lord, support us all the day long of this troublous life, until the shadows lengthen and the evening comes, and the busy world is hushed, and the fever of life is over, and our work is done. Then in thy mercy grant us safe lodging and a holy rest and peace at the last. Knowing that we too will die someday, can we pray for those whose last breaths will be taken on this day? Spare a thought for them and for ourselves, that they might pass out of this world with a sense of relief and accomplishment, of a job well done, and a sense of completion. May they know the portal of death to be a portal into a new reality where life is changed, not ending, where all that is hidden will be revealed, where there is nothing left to be done, and that all may be well. So the seventh and final word, given us by the Gospel of Luke. The other Gospels simply say he cried out with a loud voice. Luke gives us the words, Father, into thy hands I commend my spirit. That's it. That's the end. Having done all that he can do and suffered all that he can suffer, Jesus breathes his last and gives us the last of the teaching, which is how to die. How to die so that we can live. Into thy hands I commend my spirit. In my earliest days in New York on the Upper West Side, there was an unlikely evangelist in the person of a graffiti artist. I'm convinced it was a woman. Not the big tag and colorful letters we see now on subway cars and such, but thinly drawn letters scratched into the metal walls of ladies' rooms with what may have only been a ballpoint pen. Pray, the messages said. Obey God. Trust God. Trust God. This is what Jesus finally is teaching us to do, is to trust God. In the Common English Bible, it's rendered a little differently. He says, Father, into your hands I entrust my life. But there's this gesture of giving over, of putting one's life into the hands of God, trusting God. Can we? You know, Jesus talked so much about faith, and sometimes we have trouble working with this because when we say the creed, we say, I believe in God. Since the Enlightenment, we get confused and we think we're making a factual statement about history in a way that only a latter-day person would think of it. Our presiding bishop, Michael Curry, likes to remind us that I believe, credo, in this earliest sense, means something more like I give my heart to. They were looking for the verb that means faith. How do you have faith? You give your heart to something or someone. It's not a yes/no question, right? It's a question of our giving over. Can we trust God? Our sometime suffragan bishop, Catherine Roscom, told a story many years ago that I called her to ask about a few weeks back. She's working in France, by the way, for the year. She had told a story in a sermon that she gave about a fire that occurred in her New York apartment when she was a young woman with a husband and child living on the West Side. I believe it was somewhere in the 30s. It was a walk-up building. And she was awakened in the middle of the night by a neighbor who was pounding on the doors of every apartment, telling people to get out of the building because he had unwittingly set fire to it from the first floor below. And the smoke was beginning to billow up, and Catherine quickly gathered her 2-year-old daughter, woke up her husband, and tried to figure out what to do. What to do? The smoke was coming up so heavily from a floor below that she couldn't see out the window and didn't know what to do from there. And of course, she mustn't go back into the building or the stairwell where the smoke was coming in from under the door. But help came, and a firefighter came, and she heard the reassuring clunk of a ladder coming to rest on the wall below her window. And with the encouragement and the timing of the fireman who was there to help her by then, was able to stand up, take her daughter in her arms, turn around, and put her foot down the ladder and begin the climb down to safety. She had to trust the fireman, her foot, the ladder. She made it safely. She made it safely. That's trust. We talked about it, and I had a feeling, I thought, I wonder if she really wants to tell this story again after all these years. It's a pretty traumatic thing to be rescued from a fire like that. She didn't seem to mind, and I realized she had used the word miracle 3 times in the course of the story. The miracle of the fireman arriving in time, the miracle of the ladder hitting the wall, the miracle of a friend emerging with an empty apartment for the family to live in the first days after the fire. Miracle, miracle, miracle. She trusted with her life. Now, the funny thing about this, how stories change in time, and I'm so glad I called her because I had the story wrong. What I heard her say the first time when she told it was that she had gone to the window, grabbed her daughter, and fallen backward into a net, which would have been even more terrifying and downright foolish, and certainly more dramatic. But when we talk about trusting God, I think the image we're looking for is that stepping out onto the ladder. We're not falling into anything. We are giving, entrusting, offering our lives to God, leaving things in the hands of God. Kierkegaard called it the leap of faith. T.S. Eliot in The Wasteland called it the awful daring of a moment's surrender which an age of prudence can never retract. Or as some people like to say, you let go and let God. Going back to Brother Lawrence, 6 days before his death, he said, "If we have done all we can, the change we desire is soon to follow. If we have done all we can, the change we desire is soon to follow." Have we done all we can? Brothers and sisters, we get stuck. We have insoluble problems, intractable, long-standing, complicated, well-armed, fierce problems. We are in way over our heads so much of the time. We can't even watch the news some nights. We are in way over our heads. It's not giving up to give over our lives to God and to stop believing that we can fix the universe, because that's not the way it works. We don't get to fix the universe. It belongs to God, who happily will do it with us, who calls and pleads and invites and longs for us to be there with God, with Jesus, with the suffering. Can we go with Jesus in this final journey, and can we trust Jesus to be alongside when our moment comes? All will be well, and all will be well, and all manner of things will be well. Trust God.